because NATO learned Hitler's lesson. Don't have a two-front war when you're attacking the Russians. You have to neutralize Yugoslavia the way Hitler did.
But to do that, you'd need to create a case where you had to intervene against an enemy in Yugoslavia. Enter Joe Biden.
We face a blatant act of Serbian expansionism and aggression. This is no more a civil war than Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia had civil wars in the 1930s. This, as then in my view, is fascist thuggery on the march.
He was calling Serbs horrific names at the same time that he had a very influential position on the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate.
Biden was also emphasizing the importance of a new role for NATO, as seen in February of 1994 at the Senate hearing on the future of NATO.
Last month, while the Allies reassured themselves in Brussels that NATO remains at the bedrock of European security, crimes of a kind that were tried in Nuremberg a half a century ago continued unabated in Bosnia. Without a common enemy to unite us, we may find that our conceptions of what constitutes national interest may very well divide us.
He found the common enemy in the Serbian people, who were already previously demonized by US public relation firms such as Reuter and Finn, hired by various separatist groups from Yugoslavia.
They not only demonized the Serbian leadership, they demonized the Serbian people.
The problem for the Serbs was that they were a little slow off the mark. They did not understand what was being done to them, and by the time they did, the whole Balkan region had collapsed into a state of conflict in which the Serbs have made out clearly from propaganda at the time to be the enemy of everybody else.
Thus, the US quickly set out to act against the Serbs, stirring up a storm in Croatia. Operation Storm, that is.
So they came up with a plan where the Croatian army would launch an attack down into the Krajina and occupy the area that was manned by the Serbian minority that had been there for, 4 or 5 centuries. But it was declared that they were much too radical to permit to continue within the borders of Croatia.
And at a meeting on the Briuni Islands, Franjo gave his go-ahead to General Ante Gotovina for the largest single act of ethnic cleansing during the Yugoslav wars.
Da nanesemo takve udarce da Srbi praktično nestanu. Jer tu je važno, slušajte, da i ti civili, znate, da pođu, pa će onda i vojske, tako da kad pođu kolone, to djeluje psihološki jedni na druge. Znači, na taj način im dati put, a jamčiti tobože građanska prava i tako da.
An operation that lasted 84 hours in August of 1995 resulted in the death of around 2,000 and 250,000 ethnically cleansed Serbs. Slobo and his generals, the protectors of all Serbs, had abandoned them.
Šta da radimo? Pasavajte se kako znate! Gospodine generale!
Operation Storm, which was an American-inspired by some of my colleagues, because the people that were advising the Croatian army were retired American general officers and who operate just outside the Beltway in Washington.
Franjo was very happy.
Nisu imali vremena da pokupili svoje prljave pare devize niti gaće.
With the Serbs gone from Croatia, the Americans moved on to Bosnia. Simply pushing out the Serbs from there was not so easy, so a different strategy was implemented. Presenting the conflict in Bosnia as a civil war, which it was, instead of a war of Serbian aggression, meant that the Western public would be confused and the water would be muddied. To intervene, the Americans needed to make it clear who they had to intervene against.
The Serbs started this war. The Serbs are the original cause of the war.
They are the complete aggressors and wrongdoers.
NATO was used to militarily continue the colonization process, but Clinton knew it had to be somehow justified to the wider public. Perhaps the best example of what we're talking about here is Srebrenica. Srebrenica, a village in Bosnia, was declared a UN safe zone for Bosniaks seeking refuge, but was never really demilitarized, which allowed Bosniak forces to attack neighboring Serb villages. Serb commander Ratko Mladic overran Srebrenica, with thousands of Muslims killed and ethnically cleansed.
What happened in Srebrenica was a stage-managed fall of the enclave to the Serbian forces, which never expected to conquer it.
The United Nations declared that this was genocide, even though UN observer Philip Corwin estimated that the number of killed Muslims in Srebrenica was no larger than the number of Serbs killed in villages around Srebrenica. But that didn't matter. Srebrenica was to be used for a much greater agenda.
There are trustworthy witnesses on the Muslim side who claim that Ali Izetbegovic told them that Bill Clinton had indicated to him, Izetbegovic, that 5,000 dead Muslims would be the price of NATO intervention on the Bosnian Muslim side. They believe that Srebrenica was deliberately sacrificed by Izetbegovic in order to provide this burnt offering to the White House that would be the justification for intervention, and indeed the proof of the pudding is indeed.
The Bosnia government had no choice.
Mr. Salajic, speaking for his government, said,
"We have no choice, and our presidency had no choice but to appeal for a military intervention in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
You cannot go this alone. The American public will not tolerate it. The alliance cannot stand it."
And intervention ensued. Here was NATO, an organization formed for the sole purpose of defense of its member states, attacking a country that has not attacked or threatened any of its member states. Louis Mackenzie, who was the Major General of the UN Army in charge of Sector Sarajevo, tried to warn the Americans of what they were embarking upon.
So I appeared in front of Congress and they asked me my opinion, and I said, start training your grandchildren to be peacekeepers in Bosnia, because you're going to be there for generations. And a lot of them are still there.
As heavily armed US and NATO troops enforced the peace in Bosnia, the press and politicians alike portrayed Western intervention in the former Yugoslavia as a noble, if agonizingly belated response to an outbreak of ethnic massacres and human rights violations.
A lot of the so-called liberal or left-wing or progressive media were themselves co-opted by the mainstream viewpoint regarding the Balkans. In other words, they had bought into this paradigm that was presented to them by the arms of the government of the United States and the EU powers.
Only the journalists who towed the line and found new ways to attack the Serbs, other than the ones that their editors sent them to tell, other than the stories that were pre-written before they came to the Balkans, those guys excelled.
Of course, the bombing campaign forced the Bosnian Serbs to surrender. At the peace accord signing, which internally divided Bosnia into a Serb entity and a Muslim Croat entity, all those responsible for intensifying the war were praising peace. This is the village of Vrbarje, near Sokolac in Bosnia, inhabited mainly by Serbs and Muslims. After the imposed Dayton peace accords, the villagers were aware of what this meant to them. And as the town became part of the Serb entity, the Muslims decided to collectively leave to their own entity.
Eto vas uplakani oba komšije.
Ja.
Danas se rastajete.
Da, kao tako.
Pa je vam teško?
Kako vidite.
Je li ovo baš lijepo da se komšije rastaju u suzama?
Ovo je sa svega srca, mog i njegovog, sigurno.
Živjeli ste toliko godina.
Koliko imamo godina, toliko smo živjeli. Živjeli smo.
Bez svađe, bez nesuglasica.
Ne bez svađe, ne bez suglasica, nego sa pomoći jedan drugom. Čitavog života do sada je bilo i evo sada je tako.
Kako je sad? Kako vam je sad?
Teško.
Recite po srcu i duši, je li bilo maltretiranja, je li vam bilo ovdje loše?
Nikad. Nije nam moglo bolje biti.
Je li vam žao?
Pa još nam žao rastaviti se s našim komšijama, oni su nama uvijek valjali, dobri smo bili, slagali se, sve.
Jesu vas provocirala djeca, jel ste imali nikakvih problema ovdje, srpska djeca?
Nije ništa, sve smo bili fino, koji ranije što smo bili.
This video footage has never been shown anywhere before. It just didn't fit the image that the Western media had tried so hard to project. The tidy melodrama of the evil Serbs destroying everything non-Serb in sight. Do you think this would mobilize Western public opinion to intervene?
Nije bilo svađa, nije bilo pritisaka, nije bilo tuča, nije bilo.
Nikad.
Živi ste i zdravi?
Živi i zdravi. Nismo imali problema. Ni najmanji problem nisam imala. Svi su mi dolazili, i vojnici, i narod drugi. Nikad me nije niko vala, ni krivo pogledao, Boga mi.
What? Serbs not behaving like genocidal maniacs?